And when I think about communication, I think there's the external communication that happens talking to you. I think there's the type of communication that happens from our politicians, from the sort of global communication. But I also think about the sort of internal conversations that happen within families, the internal conversations that happen within ourselves. And so this is a poem about the conversation that my dad had with me when he tried to communicate that fear and that anxiety and that worry to me in a way that he hoped I would understand. One night when I was 12 years old, on an overnight field trip to another city, my friends and I bought super soakers, turned the hotel parking lot into our own water-filled battle zone. We hid behind cars, running through the darkness that lay between the streetlights, boundless laughter ubiquitous across the pavement. But within 10 minutes, my father came outside, grabbed me by my forearm, and led me into our room with an unfamiliar grip. Before I could say anything, tell him how foolish he made me look in front of my friends, he derided me for being so naive, looked me in the eye, fear consuming his face, and said, "Son, I'm sorry, but you can't act the same as your white friends. You can't pretend to shoot guns. You can't run around in the dark. You can't hide behind anything other than your own teeth." I know now how scared he must have been, how easily I could have fallen into the empty of the night, that some man could mistake this water for a good reason to wash all of this away. These are the sorts of messages I was inundated with my entire life. Always keep your hands where they can see them. Don't move too quickly. Take off your hood when the sun goes down. My parents raised me and my siblings in an armor of advice, an ocean of alarm bells so someone wouldn't steal the breath from our lungs, so that they wouldn't make a memory of this skin, so we could be kids, not casket or concrete. And it's not because they thought it would make us better than anyone else. It's simply because they wanted to keep us alive. All of my black friends were raised with the same message. The talk given to us when we became old enough to be mistaken for a nail ready to be hammered to the ground, when people made our melanin synonymous with something to be feared. But what does it do to a child to grow up knowing that you cannot simply be a child, that the whims of adolescence are too dangerous for your breath? You cannot simply be curious. You are not afforded the luxury of making a mistake, that someone's implicit bias might be the reason you don't wake up in the morning. But this cannot be what defines us. Because we have parents who raised us to understand that our bodies weren't meant for the backside of a bullet, but for flying kites and jumping rope and laughing until our stomachs burst. We had teachers who taught us how to raise our hands in class and not just to signal surrender, that the only thing we should give up is the idea that we aren't worthy of this world. So when we say that Black lives matter, it's not because others don't. It's simply because we must affirm that we are worthy of existing without fear, when there are so many things that tell us we are not. I want to live in a world where my son is not presumed guilty the moment he is born, where a toy in his hand is mistaken for anything other than a toy. And I refuse to accept that we can't build this world into something new, someplace where a child's name isn't written on a t-shirt or a tombstone, where the value of someone's life isn't determined by anything other than the fact that they had lungs. A place where every single one of us can breathe. The New Deal, if you take an American history, the New Deal I was taught was the single greatest series of legislative acts that have ever been signed in the 20th century. They are responsible for the creation of the contemporary middle class. They are the thing that single-handedly lifted people out of poverty into the middle class, into the suburbs, into home ownership, into college education, which is true. What's also true, and I didn't learn this until I read a book by Ira Katz-Nelson, who's a historian at Columbia University, and he talks about how he has a book called When Affirmative Action is White. And his point was that, like, we have all these discussions and debates about affirmative action, but don't consider the ways in which certain communities were given benefits that other communities were excluded from for generations and generations while this country was still forming itself. And so the New Deal, which were, again, the most progressive series of legislative acts that have ever been signed in at least in the 20th century, if not the entirety of our history. The stories that we are told about migrants, specifically migrants who are coming to the southern border, sometimes in this conversation, the humanity of the people who are coming here gets lost. And I think it becomes very abstract. I think it can become sort of media stories. I think it can become political rhetoric. But I think we lose track of the fact that these are people who, the vast majority of them are simply seeking safety and security and sanctuary for their family. And I think that for me, as someone who now has children of my own, there's no law, there's no border, there's no politician, there's no rhetoric that would ever prevent me from attempting to keep my children safe. And I think that we have lost a complete sense of what that is and what that means. Every year, my students read Night by Elie Wiesel. Following completion of the book, I assigned them the task of writing their own memoir. Maria came to America when she was 5 years old. Wrote that she had to cross a river before she ever knew what it meant to swim. Ran through knee-high grass as if the field were made of landmines. Hid under the belly of trucks amid concrete and fertilizer so as not to leave a scent for the dogs. She did not know why she was running, but she knew that her mother cried every night for her father. She knew she was beginning to forget the outline of her daddy's face. She knew that he worked 18 hours a day just to provide them with food they could barely find at home. She knew that he loved them and wanted to remember what it felt like to hold his daughter in his arms. But Maria was 5. She doesn't remember life in Mexico. She remembers kindergarten, sleepovers, and middle school graduation. She is more American than any slice of apple pie, but that is not what we tell her. We punish Maria for just following directions, for being a child who is simply listening to her parents. We tell her parents that they are wrong for wanting a better life for their family. We tell her that a 4.0 isn't good enough. We tell Maria that college wasn't meant for girls like her. We say too much brown skin. We say too much accent. We say, where'd you come from? We say, you don't have a number, so you don't exist. There is apathy under the eyelids of this country, and we cannot see what's right in front of us. It's hard to convince someone to do well in school when the law tells them that it won't matter. When you're a number before you're a face. How convenient that we forget our own history. A country of immigrants who were once told we didn't belong. An assemblage of faces simply waiting for our country to see us.
And the cattle in the valley.
One. This is Sarah. She just moved to a new town and she has social anxiety, and it's hard for her to connect and engage with other people. As we all have, we've gone to a restaurant or a social environment and we've all had an awkward situation where no one's talking or communicating.
But what if there was a place where you could just say hello? Just Say Hello is a communications-based restaurant specifically designed to help you feel confident and make connections in a new community. We created this restaurant to answer the question of how might we help Sarah get connected and feel confident in her new community. Our menu provides conversation starters like
movies, likes,
dislikes,
fears,
hobbies,
accomplishments,
and reminders for people like Sarah and maybe even you that suffer from social anxiety. On our website, you can put in the number of group members and your arrival time to ensure that you will be placed with another group. Just Say Hello is the first restaurant to connect people not only through cultural food, but also through the power of communication to create meaningful changes. Thank you.
As I take a second to think about someone in your life. Maybe someone in this room, maybe someone sitting right next to you who is struggling in some way. Someone whose red pen is so active in their own mind that they can't hear the beauty of their own music. And I want you to think about them and maybe come up with something you could write to them or share with them before you head home.
Going into the mountain. What? It's on the other side. Is there a dragon in here? I don't know. I don't know if this is where they keep the dragons or not.
pretty dark, can't tell. Do you see any dragons? Look on the other side. Look, there's... Whoa. It's a long ways down. Look at this business. It's so crazy. Okay, get a load of this. Down here, instead of keeping water, they actually kept animals. They would keep bears and like wild boar. And so the moat, instead of having like a regular moat, they just kept animals down here. It's crazy, right? And then there's the castle.
All right.
So if one of them is for her and one for him, which one is for her? What do you think? One is for her? One on the right.
One to the right.
This is a theater that's at the top of the hill. Apparently this was built in 1934 or 35 by the students of Heidelberg. It's pretty beautiful. It's like a top secret. Feels like a free theater. It's pretty rad.
Bueno, podemos forma individual.
Sí, sí, te tomo.
A ver. ¿Va una?
Did it.